Good evening. I want to welcome everyone to episode 3 of White House Style, a 4-week series of educational programming presented by Omar College of Architecture and Design. Omar is part of Belmont University, which, as many of you know, is hosting the third and final presidential debate on October 22nd. White House Style is part of the school's expansive Ideas of America series, which is going on through the end of the month. My name is Libby Calloway. I'm a former fashion journalist and currently run a communications company here in Nashville called The Calloway. I also chair the advisory committee for Omar's fashion program. Before I introduce our speakers for this evening, I have a couple of announcements. First of all, Omar and Belmont would like to thank the debate sponsors, particularly HCA Healthcare, the City of Nashville, the Nashville Convention and Visitors Corporation, and Ryman Hospitality Properties. The school is grateful to them and the many other sponsors listed at belmontdebate2020.com for making events like this possible. The last 2 weeks have been phenomenal. Thank you so much to anybody who has tuned in. I've had the most fun doing this. I've learned so much about the White House, and I've learned that I already knew a lot too. It's interesting how much you pick up through osmosis, just of course, school, learning about it in history, and then watching pop culture introduces you to so much about the White House. But this has been really interesting and a good way to home in on a lot of really great details. The first week we had Lena Mann from the White House Historical Association, and last week Obama interior designer Michael Smith. They were both great guests, and I really appreciate them coming on. Next week, we're wrapping up the program, and we're on Wednesday night instead of Thursday, so make sure you do that change. Wednesday, October 14th, same time, 7 p.m. I'm super excited. As a former fashion journalist, this is totally my wheelhouse. I'm inviting two old-fashioned friends of mine. First, Robin Gavon, who is a critic at large for the Washington Post. She's also the only fashion critic ever to win a Pulitzer Prize. I have sat next to her at about 100 fashion shows over the days. So I can tell you she is a great conversationalist, super smart, and knows a lot about White House style. Joining her will be the iconic Diane von Furstenberg. Diane is somebody I've also known for a while, thrilled to talk to her. She's always a lot of fun to talk to because she's got great stories. I mean, she's basically gone to the White House under every president since the early 70s. So she knows a lot. It's going to be a really fun program, and I look forward to hosting everybody and having everybody part of this conversation. But first, I hope you're hungry tonight because we have a very special food program this evening. People who've been watching have heard me say this, but for the uninitiated, the purpose of the series is to demystify the White House. Throughout these talks, we've been doing that by honoring the efforts of those who have lived and worked there over the last 228 years. Without them, the White House would have no style. Tonight, we are welcoming 7 food experts led by our special guest, Adrian Miller, who is also known as the Soul Food Scholar. Very shortly, he will be taking us behind the scenes of the White House kitchen, which has employed hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans over the last 2 centuries. Later this hour, Adrian will be talking to 6 Nashville chefs and food experts. They are Lisa Donovan, who is formerly the pastry chef at Husk and City House, and is now the author of a great new book, Our Lady of Perpetual Hunger. Charles Hunter III of The Salted Table, Julia Sullivan of Henrietta Red and the Party Line, Lokalani Alabanza of Saturated Ice Cream, Rhonda Kamen of Perfectly Cordial and the Bar Seat, and Phil Krajek of Folk and Roffin Daughters. Each of these chefs has come up with a special recipe that is based on a former president's favorite dish or flavor profile. The recipes were posted last week on the BelmontDebate2020.com website with the idea that some of you might want to prepare the whole suite and enjoy it during our talk tonight. If anybody did indeed make a dish, please post it on Instagram and tag Omar College. You can also tag Soul Food Scholar, which is Adrian's handle, and go ahead and tag me, Libby Calloway with all A's 1970. We'd love to see what you have made. But without further ado, I want to introduce our special guest, Adrian Miller. He is a food writer, attorney, and certified barbecue judge based in Denver. He received an AB in International Relations from Stanford University in 1991 and a JD from the Georgetown University Law Center in 1995. He is currently the executive director of the Colorado Council of Churches and, as such, is the first African American and the first layperson to hold that position. He previously served as a special assistant to President Bill Clinton with his initiative for One America, the first freestanding office in the White House to address issues of racial, religious, and ethnic reconciliation. He also served as a senior policy analyst for Colorado Governor Bill Ritter Jr. Adrian has been a board member of the Southern Foodways Alliance. His first book, Soul Food, The Surprising Story of an American Cuisine, One Plate at a Time, won the James Beard Foundation Award for Scholarship and Reference in 2014. His second book, The President's Kitchen Cabinet, the story of the African Americans who have fed our first families from the Washingtons to the Obamas, was published on President's Day in 2017. It was a finalist for a 2018 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work, Nonfiction, and the 2018 Colorado Book Award for History. He is currently working on a highly anticipated history of African American barbecue, tentatively titled Black Smoke. So Adrian, take it away. I'm going to fall back and let you run this deal for the next hour. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Libby. And thank you so much to the O'Moore College of Architecture and Design for hosting this event. And so what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to give you a little taste of presidential food history. And we're going to talk first about the cooking and dining spaces in the White House. We'll talk about the cooks. And then I'll share some of my favorite presidential stories. And then we'll talk to the chefs about the meal they've created, a collective meal that they've created and what the dishes mean to them. So as Libby said, you are highly encouraged to do social media, especially if you have something positive to say. If you have something negative, you can hold that. Why even put it out there anyway, right? So let's have some fun tonight. So the first thing I want to point out is on this cover slide, I am in the White House kitchen with a man named Adam Collick. He's a kitchen steward. And in addition to cooking duties, he makes sure that all the equipment in the White House is tip-top condition and working properly. He has been there since the Reagan administration. He's still in the White House today. He's an amateur bodybuilder, so he's an impressive guy. One thing I want to point out about the White House kitchen is it's a lot smaller than you think. It's only 30 feet by 26 feet. So the White House itself, the residence, the executive mansion is 55,000 square feet. So it's a tiny space in the basement. We'll talk a little bit more about that. If we go to the next slide, I just want to give you my background. I want to clear up the fact that I am not a White House chef. I wasn't a White House chef. I was on the policy side. So I worked for something called the Initiative for One America, which was an outgrowth of President Clinton's initiative on race. And the idea behind the initiative on race is that if we just talk to one another and listen, we would probably realize that we have a lot more in common than what supposedly divides us. I know what, crazy, right? So I worked on that at the very end of President Clinton's second term. The Initiative on Race, which was about a year and a half long, became the Initiative for One America, and that's what I worked on. So at the end of his administration, at that point in my life, I wanted to be the senator from Colorado. I was trying to get back to Colorado, but the job market was kind of slow. And, I just ended up watching a lot of daytime television. I'm not even going to tell you what shows. And I decided, I should read something. So I went to a local bookstore and I found a book on the history of Southern food written by the late John Egerton. And he's a well-known figure in Nashville. If you don't know about him, he's a great writer, great man. But he wrote a book called Southern Food at Home, on the Road, in History. And in that book, he said that the tribute to African-American achievement in cookery had yet to be written. And so I reached out to him by email because by the time I picked up the book, it had already been out for about 10 years. And I asked Mr. Egerton what he thought, if somebody had updated that work or had done that work. And he said, no one has really told the full story. So with no qualifications at all, except for eating a lot of soul food, I decided to dive in. And next slide, that led to my two books. The first one you heard of was Soul Food, The Surprising Story of an American Cuisine, One Plate at a Time. History of soul food. And what I do is I create a representative soul food meal and go through every part of the meal and explain what it is, the food item is, how it gets on the soul food plate, and what it means for the culture. And during the research for that soul food book, I came across a few stories of African Americans who had cooked for our presidents. I didn't have enough to write a book, but I thought, well, let me just keep digging. And if I find enough stories, that would be my next book. And that became The President's Kitchen Cabinet. Unfortunately, I didn't have the idea for this book while I worked in the White House, because I could have gotten all kinds of scoop. But, these things come when they come. So I really enjoyed doing that book, writing that book and the research. And I uncovered about 150 African-American chefs who have been in the White House, the presidential kitchen, since George Washington. So if you go through the span of history, most of the White House culinary professionals have been African-American. Not so much as of late, but for most of the 2 centuries that we've had the White House, it's been African-American cooks. So let's talk about those cooks. But before we do that, let's talk about the spaces in the White House. So the White House kitchen is basically in the basement. Now, when the White House first opened, the White House kitchen was actually in the very center of that basement. But fast forward to the Lincoln administration, Mary Todd Lincoln wanted to move the White House kitchen to the northwest corner of the basement floor because she wanted it to have more light and to seem more airy. And that's where the White House kitchen has stayed ever since. So the picture that we're seeing right now is the first known picture of the basement kitchen. And this was taken around 1888, 1889. The woman in the middle there is believed to be Dollie Johnson, who we'll talk about a little bit when we get to the cooks. But I want to point out on the right-hand side of the picture, you'll see this big, massive kind of coal range. And that was installed during the Millard Fillmore administration. And there's a little folklore about that. So before the range was installed, White House cooks would cook out of a fireplace. It's called hearth cooking. And the African-American cook was very skeptical about this big stove and actually called it the devil's entrapment. So the story goes is that President Fillmore went to the Patent and Trademark Office, got the actual plans or the schematics for the stove, brought it back, and eventually walked the cook through it and persuaded the cook to use that stove. I don't know if that's apocryphal or not, but that's the story. So that's the earliest look we have at the basement kitchen, and it changes over time. So next slide, we see the White House kitchen now around the time of Theodore Roosevelt. You can start to see improvements being made, more modern equipment. We go to the next slide. This is around 1935. So this is during the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration. This is when the White House kitchen gets electricity for the first time. And actually, after the renovations were done and the money and resources to renovate that kitchen was taken out of the federal works progress money that was designed to get the nation back to work during the Great Depression. The media took a tour of the kitchen led by First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, and actually the Black cooks had to give their blessing to the equipment. So you can almost see parallels with the stove and Millard Fillmore. The next picture you'll see is kind of the way the White House kitchen looks today. This is taken during the Truman administration, the last couple of years after the White House had been massively renovated during the last couple of years of his term. And over time, the White House equipment has been updated, but pretty much it looks like this picture you see now. There are some additional spaces in the White House for cooking. One that I want to point out is the second floor kitchen. And so in this picture, taken in the early 1960s, you see Chef René Verdun, who is the White House executive chef. He's the first White House executive chef. And the reason why he's the first is that term did not exist before Jacqueline Kennedy coined it. Before that, the White House chef was called head cook, first cook, or just White House cook. So he's the first executive chef. He's a French trained chef. And that second floor kitchen and dining space that's created was essentially a renovation of Margaret Truman's bedroom. And the reason why First Lady Kennedy did this is she didn't want the family to eat in the state dining room as they had before. She felt that it was just not intimate enough. So she wanted more of an intimate space, and she created this. So that's the kitchen. And then the next slide you'll see is the family dining room. And the interesting thing about that, I think you've heard about this in the prior two presentations in this series, is that revolutionary wallpaper, which stayed for a very, very long time. In fact, rumor is that some of the first ladies after First Lady Kennedy weren't so enthusiastic about the wallpaper because they didn't want to eat dinner with all these people dying on the walls. But there was so much sympathy for the Kennedys after President Kennedy was assassinated that first ladies were very, very reluctant to change the decor of this room because it would look like they were, quote unquote, trying to erase the Kennedys. So that never happened. Another thing, another space in the White House is the state dining room. So the state dining room has been in the same place since the opening of the White House. Originally, in the early years of the White House, only 36 people would be seated for a state dinner. But over time, more elaborate seating arrangements were devised so that more people could be put in the room. And the big innovation happened during the Kennedy administration, where essentially they started using round tables instead of the long and U-shaped tables that marked previous administrations. By having those round tables, they could actually pack a lot more people into the White House for state dinners. And just a quick note, state dinners are only for the head of state of a different country. So anybody else who's a high-ranking official would be an official dinner. So the easiest example is Great Britain. When the Queen or the King come, that is a state dinner. But when the Prime Minister of Great Britain comes, that's an official dinner. So in form and function, they may look very, very alike, but formally only head of state can have a state dinner. And when a state dinner happens, the US State Department is brought in to consult on the menu, protocols, and all kinds of things. The next space I want to tell you about is the White House mess. Now, this is not a political statement. This is actually a term. This is a military term for a dining space. And the White House mess was created in the 1950s after the White House was renovated. And essentially, it is like a private dining club for senior level administration officials. And so think of it as a really nice dining club. Now, the problem when this, or the challenge when this space was created was that there wasn't enough staff to go around. So what the Trumans decided to do, knowing that they would never get money from Congress to hire more staff, is they took the Filipino chefs from the presidential yacht and brought them over to the White House to staff the White House mess. And to this day, Navy personnel are the ones who run this space. So the White House mess, they not only make meals for senior level officials, they also cater events throughout the White House complex. They also will do advance work when the president travels. And when the president goes to Camp David, they are the ones in charge of the cooking. Next slide. In my book, I talk about Charlie Redden, who was the first certified White House executive chef. And in this picture, he is tempting President Clinton with the lobster salad sandwich. You know, one question I often get is what happens when the White House wants to have a really, really big dinner? You've probably read in the press that sometimes 1,000 people get invited to these dinners. When that happens, because of the limited space in the White House, they'll do something outside. So here you'll see a picture of an outdoor setting on the South Lawn. And first you have a look at the table setting on the left there. And then on the right, you can see kind of a bird's eye view of a very elegant dinner. One thing also to note is that sometimes the presidents will have fun with the dining spaces in the White House. And one example is the kids' state dinners, which First Lady Michelle Obama held from 2014 until the end of the Obama administration. And we'll talk about that towards the end of this presentation. So let's talk about the cooks. We have White House cooks and chefs. And the reason why I make that distinction is before, like 200 years ago, there really wasn't a difference between cooks and chefs. They were almost all called the same thing because the term chef comes from chef de cuisine, and that meant anybody who ran the kitchen. But in the late 70s, due to a lobbying effort, chef started to get a professional designation. So that's often why we have the difference now instead of before. But this next picture is the earliest picture that we have of the resident staff in the White House. This picture was taken in 1877. If we were in a live audience, I would ask you who was president at that time. Almost all the time, people fail to know that it was Rutherford B. Hayes, and I tell them how disappointed their history teachers in high school would be in them. But you know, it's kind of an obscure president. But Winnie Monroe, who's in the first row in the lower right, she was actually Rutherford B. Hayes's White House chef. And the reason why she had that position is because she was his cook in private life. So what you will find is that the head chef at the White House or the head cook often is accidental. It's just that they were the cook for somebody who eventually became president. Other thing to note here is that the entire staff is African American, and that pretty much was the way it was during the 19th century. But in terms of the overall White House culinary operations, if we look at the next slide, this is much more representative over the sweep of history, because the White House kitchen has been diverse in terms of race, ethnicity, and class since its earliest days. In the earliest days, you had enslaved cooks working alongside free African Americans. You had indentured whites working alongside free whites. You often had foreign chefs in the mix. A lot of presidents had a French chef who was working there. And the reason why we had so many enslaved cooks in the White House is because we've had several slaveholders as presidents before the Civil War. And in order to get predictability in the cooking and actually save money, they would bring their enslaved cooks. So moving from left to right, you have Raymond Jackson. And shortly after this picture, he was involved in a tragic accident that severed his legs. So his stint in the White House kitchen ended, but he did return as a typist to type up menus. So he's still involved in food service in some ways. Skipping to the man in the middle with the long, tall toque, that is Rene Verdongen. We saw him earlier. But I want to talk about the woman immediately to his right, and that is Esseline Dewberry, who actually works from the Truman administration all the way to the Reagan administration. And she was an opera singer, and longtime pastry chef Roland Mesnier, who's quite a character, said that she would sing opera while they were preparing meals. And so he called her Madame Dewberry. But if we go all the way to the far right, I don't know this gentleman's name, but it shows that Filipinos were part of the White House kitchen tradition. In fact, outside of African Americans, the strongest representation among presidential cooks have been from Filipinos. And again, that goes to their presence as Navy cooks. After the Spanish-American War, a lot of naval officers started phasing out Black cooks and bringing Filipino cooks on board as their personal chefs. So one example of a enslaved cook is Hercules, who was the enslaved cook for George Washington. He eventually becomes the White House or the presidential cook while the presidential residence was in Philadelphia, because while Washington was president, DC was being built and so was the White House. So he spent his term in Philadelphia. And when Hercules was brought to Philadelphia to be the head cook, there was one problem. Pennsylvania had passed something called the Gradual Abolition Act of 1780, which said if you were an enslaved person on Pennsylvania soil for 6 months or longer, you were automatically freed. The way that Washington got around this is that Hercules and other enslaved staff in the presidential residence were packed up and taken back to Mount Vernon, left there for a couple of weeks around the time that the 6-month deadline was tolling, and then brought back. So throughout his presidency, he just brings them back and forth in order to skirt around that law. I know, messed up, right? Hercules was well known to a lot of people. He had some liberties, but he ends up escaping. And for a long time, we thought he disappeared to history because Washington had a terrible temper and spared no expense to try to recapture anyone who had escaped from him. And what we know now is that Hercules took on assumed the name of the person who owned him before the Washingtons, a man named James Posey. So he went by Hercules Posey and actually made his way to New York City and was a chef there, but he died in the year 1812 of tuberculosis. So fascinating character, and I hope you all will try to get to know more about him. Next slide, we'll talk about Laura Dollie Johnson. And Dollie Johnson was a famous cook, and she was one who was reluctant because she actually wanted to stay in Lexington, Kentucky, where she was born and raised, and become a caterer. But a young Theodore Roosevelt went to the home of John Mason Brown and had a dinner made by Dollie Johnson. And when he had that dinner, he was so impressed that he informed Benjamin Harrison that he should definitely hire her. There was only one problem. When Dollie Johnson was persuaded to come work in the White House, there was already a white woman working there named Madame Payonard. And she was really upset about this. So she actually filed a lawsuit against President Harrison for wrongful termination, basically what we would say these days. That got settled, but it was kind of messy. And this is very much like what played out on The Bachelor a few seasons ago, you know, when that guy liked someone, but he proposed to someone else. same kind of situation, all gets worked out. Dollie Johnson does go work in the White House, but she only stays about less than a year because her daughter gets sick. She goes back to Lexington, Kentucky to care for her daughter, but her reputation was so strong that when Grover Cleveland defeats Harrison and becomes president, he talks Dollie Johnson to come and cook for him. And she does that. And she ends up running a restaurant in Lexington, Kentucky after the White House stint is over. And she even took out a newspaper ad in the 1890s playing off her fame as a White House cook. Another example of a cook I want to tell you about is Henry Haller, a Swiss-born cook who succeeds Rene Verdon as the White House executive chef. And he's more typical of kind of the White House chefs these days, in that he has a long tenure. So he basically cooks from Lyndon Johnson all the way to Ronald Reagan before he retires. And he was very known for meeting the needs of the first families, very successful at adopting to different tastes. In this picture, he's making a wedding cake for Tricia Nixon, which was very controversial because the White House released the recipe for this cake, and evidently the home cooks tried it and the recipe didn't work. And then there was a little intrigue because the White House kind of went into spin control, saying, no, it works. But home cooks were saying, no, it doesn't. And finally, the White House had to relent and put out a modified recipe. In the next slide, just to give you a sense of how the White House kitchen is organized, you have the top of the org chart would be the executive chef, and then usually there's a pastry chef, and then that pastry chef may have an assistant pastry chef, and then there are anywhere from 3 to 5, maybe even as much as 7 kind of assistant chefs. Typically, they are on loan from the U.S. Navy. They're detailed to the White House kitchen, but there are some people on staff. They are not all in the kitchen at the same time. They usually work in shifts. And so one example on the left is Bill Yosses, who was President Obama's pastry chef. And then the other gentleman on the right is Chef Sam Kass, who was the President Obama's private chef. So typically presidents have relied on the executive chef to do all the cooking. So all the cooking for the family and all the cooking for the guests. But from time to time, a president may bring somebody on board to cook just for the family. And that's what Sam Kass did for President Obama, for the Obamas. The only other president in recent memory to do that was Lyndon Johnson, and we'll hear more about his chef in a moment. The current White House chef is a Filipina named Cristeta Comerford. She was hired during the Clinton administration as an assistant chef, and then she was elevated to the position of executive chef during the second term of President George W. Bush, and she's been there ever since. All right, so we've kind of talked about what happens in the White House complex, but then what happens when the president travels? So Franklin Delano Roosevelt would travel to Warm Springs, Georgia, which had hot springs, and he would get treatments for his polio condition. He had been going there before he was a president. He went there while he was governor of New York. And while he was there, the woman who cooked for him was a woman named Daisy Bonner, who was on loan from a wealthy white family in the area. So to ingratiate themselves with the Roosevelts, they would lend Daisy Bonner to President Roosevelt for weeks at a time. She got him hooked on all kinds of Southern food. But the story I'm going to tell you here is of a cheese souffle. So when President Roosevelt died, he was actually in Warm Springs, Georgia. And Daisy Bonner was in the process of making one of his favorite things, a cheese souffle. And it was time to be served at 1:15 p.m. Roosevelt has his fatal cerebral hemorrhage at 1:12. So he never, ever actually gets to eat that souffle, and she never gets to serve it. But Daisy Bonner swore that souffle did not fall for 2 hours until President Roosevelt was officially pronounced dead. Now, if you've ever made a souffle, you know that is a miracle, but that's what she said. And Daisy Bonner was so moved by President Roosevelt's death that she's the one who calls the White House switchboard to inform them. And if you go to Warm Springs, Georgia today at the complex, it's called the Little White House Complex. You'll see the cabin and the kitchen where she cooked. And on the walls, she wrote, Daisy Bonner cooked the first and last meal for President Roosevelt. And that is laminated to preserve it for the future. Also, what happens when the president flies? He's on Air Force One. Typically, there's not cooking on Air Force One because you can't really cook at altitude. So it's really reheating. So what happens is the meals are prepared in advance at Andrews Air Force Base. They're kind of half cooked or 3/4 cooked. And then on the airplane, they actually warm the food up. There are 2 kitchens on Air Force one kind of in the front for the president and staff, and one in the back for passengers. And there's a crew of 3, and their jobs are essentially one person is in charge of reheating the food. Another person takes orders, and another person takes beverages or makes the beverages for the passengers. So the person on the left here is Wanda Joell. And Wanda Joell is the first African-American to serve on Air Force One, and she served from George Herbert Walker Bush to President Obama. The only reason that she retired is because the military had a mandatory retirement service length of 20 years. So that gives you an idea. Okay, so let me go through some of my favorite food stories. The first one I want to tell you about is Samuel Fraunces. He's a biracial man who comes from the Caribbean to New York in the 1750s. He runs a tavern called Fraunces Tavern. The next slide shows you a drawing of the original. There's actually a replica of the tavern that exists to this day. It's on the corner of Pearl and Broad Streets in Lower Manhattan. And while Fraunces ran that tavern in the 1770s and 60s, one of his most popular customers was General George Washington. And he would go there to eat. And George Washington was a human being like anybody else. And one of his favorite foods were the green peas that come in the spring. He loved green peas so much that his contemporaries called him P. Diddy. Okay, I was just kidding about that. But the story goes is that one day, Fraunces' daughter Phoebe is making a meal for Washington, including the green peas. There was a guy named Thomas Hickey that was kind of hanging around. He distracts Phoebe and adds a little extra seasoning to the peas. They get sent out to the general. Phoebe thinks something is going on. She tells Fraunces, who immediately discerns what happens. He bursts from the kitchen, and as the story goes, as the general is about to eat those peas, he takes the whole plate of peas and takes them away from the general and throws them out the window. And at that precise moment, a chicken was walking by, pecks at the peas, and dies. So they figure out from that animal testing that the general's food was poisoned. So it's a great story, but it's probably not true. There was a guy named Thomas Hickey, and he was actually executed, but his crime was counterfeiting, not attempted assassination. So he forged passes that would have allowed some unsavory characters to be in Washington's presence. But ladies and gentlemen, if the story is true, it's the first example of homeland culinary security in our great nation. Next, I want to tell you about Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thomas Jefferson had a mac and cheese Jones. He loved it. And we know this because he gets introduced to the dish while he's Minister of France. He comes back, and on February 6, 1802, he actually serves mac and cheese in the White House. We know this because one of the guests there, a guy named Manasseh Cutler, who was a U.S. representative from Massachusetts, wrote about it in his diary. He did not like it. He said it had a strong and disagreeable taste. But there's at least one example of mac and cheese being served in the White House. And on the left-hand side there, you have actually a drawing of a macaroni maker from Jefferson's own hand. Had a very curious mind, and that original document is on display in the possession of the Library of Congress. Another one I want to tell you about is Franklin Delano Roosevelt and pig's feet. He loved pig's feet, and Daisy Bonner got him hooked on them. And he loved them so much that he would serve them at dinners at the White House. And we know this because one of the African-American butlers, a guy named Alonzo Field, wrote about it in his memoirs. And FDR actually served pig's feet to Winston Churchill. And it was actually sweet and sour pig's feet, which was a recipe from the Princess of Norway. Safe to say, Churchill was not feeling it. One of the more interesting personalities I discovered in my book is Zephyr Wright, who was the longtime private cook for Lyndon Johnson, becomes his, even though they had an executive chef in the White House, she becomes the family cook. She's a very momentous figure. She played a role in the 1964 Civil Rights Act because of all the discrimination she faced when the family would travel back and forth from DC to the central part of Texas. Actually, Lyndon Johnson used her Jim Crow experiences to lobby support for the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And when he signed the bill, he gave her one of the pens that he used to sign that legislation and said, "You deserve this as much as anyone." But she did get the president in some hot water in something that I call the Great Chili Controversy of 1964. Now, if I have any Texans listening right now, what they will tell you is that chili has no beans because it's chili con carne, right? Chili peppers with meat, not chili con frijoles. But most Americans are used to having beans in their chili. So when the White House released this recipe card for something called the Pedernales River chili, and the Pedernales River is a river that runs alongside the LBJ Ranch in Central Texas, when Americans saw that there were no beans, they lost their minds. So the White House went into spin control. And so one of the greatest finds of my research was finding this recording where Zephyr Wright is talking to the social secretary basically about how to handle this situation about beans. So we're going to play that tape right now.
We have correspondents asking us if the president and the family like beans. Well, I know enough to say yes. But I wanted to check with you. What would you say if you were asked that question by a responsible person?
Oh, I would say yes.
And
did I ask what kind, did it?
No, but I know that he particularly liked pork and beans.
He liked pork and beans, like pinto beans. He liked lima beans, green beans.
That's green limas are dried.
Green limas.
Green.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And the green, fresh green beans.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
And he likes the Blue Lake canned green beans, marinated, and use it as a salad.
Uh-huh.
Marinated in French dressing.
Uh-huh.
So,
yeah.
He liked, well, that's not a bean, no, that's a pea. I started the green peas. But he just liked beans.
Now, the green limas,
The baby limas.
Green baby limas.
Mm-hmm.
How do you prepare those for him?
Just in salted water, and cook them, and add a little oleum margarine and pepper, and cook them for a good long while until the juice in them is kind of thick.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
You used to use the Velveeta, but you don't do that anymore.
Well, I do that
for parties.
For parties. We use the Velveeta, also mushrooms. You call it lima beans with cheese and mushroom sauce.
And the pintos, I guess you cook like I do, with salt pork or ham bones.
That's right.
And pork and beans, do you doctor them up?
Not for him. He like them just plain. He doctors them himself with some kind of pepper sauce or something like that.
All right. Zephyr, do you know where any of the chili cards are, chili recipe cards?
I sure don't. I may have one or two here.
Well, somebody's got some, and I'll find them because I need that one also.
Okay.
Nice talking to you.
Okay, doke.
Thank you a lot.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
I just love that recording. I don't know how many of you use Velveeta for special occasions, but that's just a lot of fun. Lady Bird Johnson in her memoirs wrote that that recipe card was the second most requested document from the federal government in 1964, besides the information on the newly formed Women and Children's Nutrition Program. Next, we would have what I call the most cookingest president that we had, and that was Dwight Eisenhower. He's here, he loved to grill, and so much so that he actually installed a grill on the rooftop of the White House. So people would be walking by the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue, and they'd see smoke coming out of the White House. That was the president up there grilling. Another funny story involves President Ronald Reagan, who loved, like other presidents, they love their junk food. And often what we find in presidential history that it's often the first spouse and the White House physician who often keep our presidents on their diet. But President Reagan loved Bavarian cream apple pie. And there's one story about him getting on Air Force One and hearing from the steward on the plane that they were serving that. He'd lit up, but then Nancy Reagan said, "You're not having any of that." And no, he meekly acquiesced. And lastly, I'll talk about the kids' state dinners. Again, this was an effort of Michelle Obama, the First Lady Michelle Obama. And essentially, it was an idea to get kids eating healthy. So she had a recipe contest where kids from each state would create a recipe, and then the winners would be brought to the White House late summer, usually, to have this kid state dinner, and a few of the kids winning recipes were featured. So I found one in Colorado named Kiana Farkash. She made a grilled salmon with farro salad and a tropical berry smoothie. I was very impressed because at her age, I was just making cream of wheat and matzo meal. And so Kiana Farkash was really moved by that experience, and she's now on fire to do food justice. So that's just a very quick taste of presidential history. Thank you so much. And now we will transition and talk to our chefs who put together this great meal. So we have an all-star lineup of chefs. And so the first chef I'm going to speak with is Chef Rhonda Kamen, and she's going to talk about the mocktail that she created. So Chef Rhonda, introduce yourself and tell us about what you created.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Kamen. I'm the owner and creator of Perfectly Cordial and the owner of Bar Seat here in Nashville, Tennessee. The president that I was given was John F. Kennedy, and I did a riff on a recipe called lime ice that was in the cookbook. It really grabbed my attention, and I did like a limeade version that I like to call the Bay of Pigs Invasion. It's really, really simple. So I'm just going to make it really quickly. I have the tropical sour, the Perfectly Cordial tropical sour that has key lime. And so just a really, really easy, just a little bit of that. And then I topped it with my fave, Topo Chico, or any type of seltzer or sparkling water. And then, because we eat with our eyes and our nose, I'm going to zest a little bit of lime zest on top. So the first thing that you smell and that you taste is the fresh lime. And that's why I chose, it just was like a really good riff on that one. But, you know, during JFK, there was the Bay of Pigs invasion. We had to do with Cuba, missiles, and a little bit of a history lesson, which I really didn't know about until, sad to say, I was listening to Billy Joel. We didn't start the fire. That was my first intro to that. Even living in Miami, it was the first time. So that's what sent me down that path. And I just love the recipe. Very simple, but complex.
I have a quick question for you. In your experience, you know, being a strong Miami native, is there really a difference between key limes and the other kind of limes you get?
Yes, so this is a domestic lime that we would usually see at our grocery store. A key lime you usually find is very popular in Key West, or the Keys down there, down south. They're much smaller, more acidic, concentration of flavor, and you have to juice a lot of them to get the same quantity that you would get in a domesticated lime.
Okay, great. Thank you. So how would that recipe that you created change if you were using key limes? You would use a lot more? Is that what you're saying?
You would use, you would probably have to bump up your sugar. And so in the Perfectly Cordial, I modify it with key lime, regular lime, Meyer lemon for sweetness. And so I temper the acidity of the key lime with that Meyer lemon. And so if you were just using regular straight key limes, you would probably want to balance that with a little bit more sugar and maybe a little bit more of your sparkling water. So it wouldn't be so much of a pucker.
Love it. All right. Thank you so much, Chef. We appreciate you.
No problem.
Right. Yeah. All right. So for our amuse-bouche, we had Chef Charles Hunter III create a dish for us. So Chef Charles, what's going on?
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. Tell us about your dish and the president who inspired it. Oh, and tell us a little about you first.
Yeah. So I'm Charles Hunter III. I am a personal chef and food blogger here in Nashville, Tennessee, and I have a company called The Salted Table. And essentially what we do is create memorable gatherings for our clients, from backyard weddings to business dinners, what have you not. And the president that I have is Benjamin Harrison, 23rd president of the United States. And I have created a cheese crostini with a cheese spread and his wife's recipe for hot almonds. And it's a really delicious, simplistic recipe. It comes together really quick. I mean, I think I made this in under like 30 minutes. And it's just a beautiful piece of white bread that's been nicely toasted. The cheese spread is eggs, butter, cheese, a little bit of milk, salt, and pepper. And you just stir until it becomes this really beautiful spreadable paste, let it cool. And then the spicy almonds is a kind of like choose your own adventure situation. So if you like spice, you can really kick up the cayenne in it, or if you want it a little bit milder, you can cut back on that. But it just came together really quickly. I think it just speaks of the time. People were very just resourceful. It's a great way to feed a lot of people with a little. It's just simplistically delicious.
So how would that cheese spread be different from, say, like pimento cheese? Is it similar?
You actually have to use a double boiler. Pimento cheese, you don't. It's kind of like a one-stop shop in a bowl, but this takes a little bit of technique. So you put all the ingredients in a double boiler, and you actually have to put a little elbow grease in there and do some stirring. So you don't want to scramble the eggs, but you want everything to kind of emulsify.
All right. Well, thank you, Chef Charles. We really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Next up, we have Chef Lisa Donovan. Chef Lisa, why don't you tell us about yourself and your dish and the president who inspired it?
I'm happy to be here with you, Adrian.
Yeah, cool.
Hey, I'm Lisa. I'm a cook. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I wrote a book, and I made some oyster stew in honor of Abraham Lincoln, which I want to figure out how to show y'all.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Can you see it? Can you see my ears? I'm not quite sure why it was his favorite dish, but it's a really simple stew. And I made I made a whole batch of some oyster crackers, which are gluten-free because that's my situation. But it's basically almost like a soupy oyster gratin, if you can imagine. So I kind of changed it up a little bit. His was pretty basic. Like every time I researched any of the recipes, it was basically like boil some cream, add some oysters. And so I sauteed some leeks, and I just made a little bit of like rosemary butter, and then sauteed my leeks in that, and then just sort of let my cream and whole milk kind of play around with that for a little while. And then I added some fresh oysters, and I actually here's how committed I am, Adrian. Are you ready?
All right, give it to me.
I came oceanside. I'm a landlocked girl. I came oceanside for this.
For the win. We appreciate that.
Actually, it was like, this was already planned, simul-planned, but it happened to work out very well. So I have some fresh oysters. I'm in South Carolina on the coast, and I have some really beautiful fresh oysters. And basically, you just throw them in with their juices and kind of let it all work out. I add a little bit of some white vinegar and a little bit of nutmeg as well, just to like help it out a little bit. And then you don't have to add so much salt. And then just put some chives and the oyster crackers on top.
Okay, was that paprika also that I see on top there?
No, I'm a little bit of a weirdo. I think it's some Aleppo pepper. I happen to carry some spice around with me.
Okay, some people put hot sauce in their bag, but you carry Aleppo pepper. All right.
I had a little Aleppo pepper here, and it works. It just adds a nice little kick up.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chef Lisa. For our next course, we're going to go to Chef Phil Krajek. Hey, how are you?
Hey, Adrian, how are you?
All right. Tell us about yourself and your dish.
Yeah, so I'm Phil Krajek. Like Lisa, I'm also a cook in Nashville. I have 2 restaurants, Rolf and Daughters and Folk. And the president that I had was Jimmy Carter. And as a Georgia native, Jimmy loved greens. And so I prepared the version of fall braised greens that our family eats on the reg. And we base it just around whatever's in season, whatever we're getting in our CSA basket. We bridge a little bit of some like Southern ethics with Italian methods by making a sofrito, adding tomato, and then building layers of flavor. I add chopped pickles in the beginning and sweat those with the onions. I put my hot sauce in early and cook it down. We put apple cider vinegar in and braise that down as well. I like to, whenever possible, I put the stems of some of the like tougher greens like collards, cut thin across the grain, and I put them in first and let them cook for a really, really long time so they get totally tender. And then in batches, I kind of alternate adding the greens and a little bit of a stock. And what we do and this is kind of modern and incorporating other culture, is we make a stock with kombu or kelp and dried shiitake mushrooms. So you get all the umami you would get from putting like a, smoked ham hock or pork product in it, but you leave it totally vegetarian, right? The other thing for me is we never cover the pot. We leave it open, so it's constantly evaporating, concentrating, building layers of umami. And I want to cook the greens well done. And what you end up with, if you can see here, is something that's, it's almost fudgy in texture. And what I really love to do is, if it hasn't really cooled off yet, we just eat it at room temperature with lemon, olive oil, some really good crusty bread. And then, maybe the next day I'll put it in between slices of bread with some cheese and make a panini with it.
Okay. And how would you change the cooking time if you were using tenderer greens?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. So for younger greens, things that are more, you could even use a lettuce for this, right? You could cook those for 15 or 20 minutes. For smaller kales like lacinato, when they're only 4 to 6 inches long, about 30, 40. And then for tougher greens that are starting to get waxier or are further along, like really adult turnip greens or collard greens, you want to cook those for a couple hours. It's really one of those things that you get rewarded by cooking it slowly for a long time.
All right. Well, thank you. And I really appreciate the fact that you use the stems as well. So thanks for using the whole plant.
Thanks, Adrian. My pleasure.
All right. Next up is Chef Julia Sullivan. Tell us about yourself and your dish.
Hi, I'm Julia from Henrietta Red in Nashville. I chose to do a crab salad. My president is LBJ, who of course is a big Texan Southerner, and a lot of the foods on his list were sort of Southern classics, but also a lot of coastal cuisine. We have an oyster bar. It's a good fit for me. I actually did a salad that was on our menu last summer, which is jumbo lump crab from Bayou La Batra, Alabama. And his version that you sent me had, it was a little bit dated, I would say, so I just updated things a little bit, kind of kept it in vogue with a nice green goddess dressing, as well as some serrano pepper, shallot, some Castelvetrano olive, and then some really nice garnishes from my garden here at home, which are sun gold tomatoes, some nasturtium leaves, and some little citrus gem marigolds. So I'll try and give you a good shot of that. There we go.
Nice.
Crab salad.
Okay.
Nice.
Would that same kind of combination, your flavor profile, you think work with other seafood? Like, could you use a strong whitefish or something like that? What do you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I actually think in his recipe it gave the option of crab or lobster or other types of seafood. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the items in this are really complementary, like a little bit citrusy, nice and green, some nice acid from the tomato, avocado, and herbs in the green goddess. And so, very seafood friendly. It's got some tarragon notes and alliums. It's great.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It looks delicious.
Thank
All right,
you, Adrian.
now for a very sweet ending, we got Locolani Alabanza. So we'll welcome her and tell us about you and your dish.
Hi. So I have the last course. I'm Locolani Alabanza. I'm the owner of Saturated Ice Cream, which is a non-dairy ice cream company. But tonight we're going to be doing dairy. And so I have number 3, which I was really excited about, which is Thomas Jefferson, because ice cream was brought to the White House before that, but he was really the one to actually write a recipe, and he was very excited after he spent, 4 years in France. So his recipe is actually really simple. It has 3 ingredients, which are just eggs, sugar, and cream, but it's very egg heavy. So the cooking method is similar, but they used to put it in what's called a sabatier, which looks like a metal container with a lid and a handle. Ice harvesting started in the 1800s, so there was ice at that time. So you chip it away, put it in a wooden bucket, and you would spend about 40 minutes, turning this ice cream until you had some sort of texture. Then it was put into a mold, which I haven't gotten my hands on yet, but I will soon. And then it was frozen, and then they popped it out, and you had this really spectacular looking piece for dessert. And so what I did is I love things like tapioca syrup or like corn syrup because they do a really beautiful thing to the texture of the ice cream. So I updated it. It's, basically my recipe, which I love adding salt, which actually pulls out a lot of nice flavors. The vanilla aspect, which is not in the original recipe. And also he loved plums, apparently. So I made a plum compote on the side. And it's just this cute little dish here. And I added a little thyme sprig on top.
Oh, nice. Thyme. Okay, because I'm used to mint. I'm not, thyme. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay. Tell me about your earliest ice cream memory.
So mine is, I think it would be Dryer's. What is it? Oh my gosh. No, it just slipped my mind. It was Dryer's. My mom was just telling me how my grandma loved Jamocha fudge. Oh, Neapolitan. It was Dryer's Neapolitan. I was like, where's the word? Which was my first taste of like chocolate, strawberry, and vanilla mixed together, but I didn't like any of them together. I had to eat them separately. It was a thing. So fast forward a million years later, here I am making ice cream.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the chefs for this all-star lineup and this great meal. And it's been fun. Thank you for your time and being with us. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Libby Calloway. Thank you so much.
Hey guys, I'm back. I just ran to get Adrian's book. I just wanted to plug it a little bit. It's really fascinating. And you can order. Adrian, where can we get this? Where's the best place to order it? Does Amazon have it?
Amazon has it, but you can order it from me directly and I'll sign it. You can go to soulfoodscholar.com and I'll sign it any way you want. If you want me to sign it, I couldn't have done this without you. I'm happy to do that.
I'm going to send this one back to you. You're going to sign it for me and send it back to me.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Adrian, for being here. This was really, really fun. And to all of our chef friends and partners, we really appreciate it. It was wonderful having it felt like everybody was in the living room together. So I really appreciate that. Please tune in next week for the last edition of the series. Once again, it is First Lady Style. We're talking to Robin Gavon of the Washington Post and Diane von Furstenberg. I think it's going to be a really spirited, fun conversation and a great way to wrap up this program. So thanks everybody so much. If you want to watch this program again, you know where you are. You're already on the website now, but you can also watch the other weeks on that site as well, BelmontDebate2020.com. Thank you so much. Have a great week.